Are you familiar with FBI Special Agents Kyle Seraphin?
I'm familiar with the name.
Is that yes?
I'm familiar with the name. Familiar with the name. Familiar with the name.
Let's bring in Kyle Seraphin. He's the FBI whistleblower who helped expose government censorship of our First Amendment rights.
Now, we only have this memo because a recently suspended FBI agent called Kyle Seraphin brought it to the public. And we're grateful that he did. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
He's the host of something that strangely is called the Kyle Seraphin Show.
Kyle Seraphin, I can't thank you enough for speaking out. I knew you guys were out there, and I knew it was just a matter of time, but you got a lot of guts putting your face and your name to this. You're doing a service on behalf of the American people, and from the bottom of my cracked and broken heart sometimes, thank you very much.
Take a look behind the curtain with a real whistleblower and American patriot. Prepare to embrace the uncomfortable truth because this program has no time for comforting lies. Here is civil liberties enthusiast, Second Amendment defender, and recovering FBI agent Kyle Seraphin.
Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to the Kyle Seraphin Show for our 350th episode. Today is Thursday. It is July the 18th, and we are rolling live right now on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. As you can see, the chat is already moving. And someone who's usually hanging out in the chat, who's very important to me, is going to be joining us for this morning's episode. It's my father, Charlie Seraphin. He is a veteran newsman, spent a lot of time raising 6 children, and worked for Major League Baseball, was called a newsman back when newsmen were newsmen by Glenn Beck when I listened to him do an interview. Many iconic stories. We're going to be reflecting on the nature of the events of this week and where it sits in the historical context that will inevitably be compared as kids learn history. There's no question in my mind that this has been one of those weeks that people will talk about for a very long time. So look forward to that. Let me get started by saying thanks to my friends over at Catholic Vote. If you guys want to support the program, catholicvote.org/give is how you can do that. You can give directly to Catholic Vote. They are in the fight for faith, family, and freedom. And it is a fight right now, is it not? They're going to be taking care of trying to get Catholic voters out, people who otherwise agree with us, but for some reason do not decide to go vote. And if they can move the needle on the Catholic vote, they actually will move the needle across this country. They have targeted certain areas. They're using the money they have after doing extensive research to go out there and get these folks that believe in the things that we believe in, God and family and individual civil liberties, and say, hey, what the heck are you doing? Get off the bench, get out of the pews, and get into the voting boxes or the battle box if you're Joe Biden. catholicvote.org/give. And if you guys want to get the best, probably 2-minute email you can read, you're going to want to get the loop. It's catholicvote.org/loop. And you can read it right there. I'm not going to waste any more time. We're going to bring on my father and I guess probably my mentor and my role model for most of my life here. Welcome to the program. Thanks so much for getting up early, Dad.
Good morning, son. Love you. Thank you for what you do every day. And it's my pleasure to be here.
So let's talk about where this week fits in the grand scheme. You're almost 75 years old, and you've seen some life, and you've seen some things. Maybe let's put this in perspective. How important has this week been, do you think, for American history?
I think it would be more important if it happened a long time ago. And when I say that, the world has changed because of the technology, I guess. But the news cycle is so short now. It used to be that when things happened, they were reflected on for weeks and months and years, and people thought about them and wrote about them and talked about them. But it seems in today's world, there's so much information out there that even really significant historical events like Saturday get lost. And so I don't know how to explain it any other way.
Well, people have been writing about the Kennedy assassination, for example, for decades. And I guess people didn't buy the original explanation, and people still don't buy the original explanation, and the explanation has changed, and it still doesn't really move the needle for people. Let's go back maybe and give people kind of a context of your news career and some of the things that you covered to give that kind of perspective. I want to kind of just give you the floor to go with it.
Okay, so even before my news career, let's just talk about life, okay? Because you remember significant things. I was in 8th grade, sitting in a classroom, and the principal of the school, the nun, came in, and she said, everybody stand up. We're going to march single file into church and pray because our president has been shot. That was John F. Kennedy. The next one I remember, I was a senior in high school. My mother came and woke me out of a deep sleep in the middle of the night and said, they've killed another one of the Kennedys. Come down. And we went in on that occasion. They actually, for the first one, they wheeled a television into the classroom. The technology is so different, people can't even imagine, but they had a cart and they had a black and white television, and they wheeled it into the classroom and plugged it into the antenna system. And we watched the coverage of the aftermath of the Kennedy assassination. And then we had color television by the time I'm a senior in high school, and we watched the over and over again what happened in the kitchen of the hotel in Los Angeles when Bobby Kennedy was murdered. So those images just get burned into your brain, and there's certain little aspects of it. A lot of it I've forgotten, and because I knew we were going to do this, I went back and I started doing some research, and I went, man, there's a lot to connect today with the past, but we forget about it. One of the really weird things, this is just off, but I'll say it now so I don't forget it later. But of all the shooters, and I think there were probably 6 attempted assassinations, not presidential, but 6 attempted assassinations that were big story, historical type things in my lifetime, and 4 successful assassinations. All of the shooters except 2 were in their 20s or early 20s. And I think that has relevance to today's stories. We're talking about how the 20-year-old kid, rifle and everything, but so many of these shooters were 24 or younger. And the only 2 exceptions were James Earl Ray, who was 40 years old. He shot Martin Luther King allegedly, and that's another one of those stories. And then Sarah Jane Moore, who shot at President Ford, she was 45. But all the rest of them were young people, and for the most part, they were either tied to some kind of a conspiracy, something that most people believe the government was involved in, or if they acted alone, they were nut jobs. They were just crazy. And we've had quite a few of those. So the 3 that come out, obviously from the 60s when I was young, before I was actively involved in news, were John Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King before that. And I have recollections of those. What I didn't realize is, going back, is you talked about John Kennedy. The Warren Commission report hasn't even been fully disclosed. So we don't even know what they came up with. But I thought it was really interesting in reading about it that the reason we had a Warren Commission is because LBJ didn't want the Congress doing an independent investigation. And so they put it in a special box, and they had to have special legislation in order to have the Warren Commission. Then they did this thing. They gave it to 800 some pages or something, gave it to LBJ, and it's been dribbled and drabbled out, but no one has any confidence that they ever got to the truth because of the logistics of it and the grassy knoll and all the things that we talk about with JFK. I knew there was and I had a personal involvement with the questions surrounding Bobby Kennedy's killing. I didn't know a lot about MLK, but as I read about that, they arrested James Earl Ray 2 months after the shooting at Heathrow Airport in London. And that to me, that's just kind of weird.
What was he doing in London?
Yeah, what was he doing in London, and how did he get there? And then, with Lee Harvey Oswald, was married to a Russian, spent a lot of time in Russia, and so Russia. So what's that all about? And then, but the last one, Bobby Kennedy, years after he died, I had the opportunity to interview this psychologist, and the psychologist had just been fired from his job at San Quentin Prison, and I did a lot of interviews with a lot of people, and some of them were really out there, and some of them were really fascinating, interesting people. This guy was one of them, and he was so credible to me. And he said that they fired him because he had just done a psychological analysis of James Earl Ray. And when he did Sirhan. And when they did the analysis, he said he was the easiest hypnotic victim that thank you, Diane. He was the easiest victim that he'd ever hypnotized, ever. He said, just like he went out in like seconds. And then he said, while he was hypnotized, his handwriting was completely different. And there were so many aspects of his personality that were just the opposite of what he was when he was conscious. He had no conscious recollection of being in the hotel and shooting at Bobby Kennedy. And he didn't know. So they said he was a Manchurian candidate. There was a woman in a polka dot dress, and you can go back in the conspiracies and read all the details of it. But I talked to this guy was absolutely convinced that Sirhan did not act alone. And then as I've gone back and just within the last couple of days and read the stories, they said he had 8 shots in his revolver, and he shot 2 of them in the direction of Bobby Kennedy. One of them hit the pad in Kennedy, and the other 6 he was tackled, and they went in the other direction. But there were 13 shots that were fired, and even Robert Kennedy Jr. suggests that somebody else killed his dad. It was never Sirhan. They were trying to get him out of prison, and the guy who allegedly killed Bobby Kennedy killed him at point blank range to leave an impression, whatever they call that pattern of
like a powder burn or something.
Powder burn on his back of his head. And Sirhan came at him from the front. You look at the video and see. So all of those 3 assassinations have one thing in common, and that is they said, and no one at the time, we weren't ready to believe it, but they all had what somebody believed was government involvement in killing these 3 very important people. So that kind of gets us to the modern day. No, we don't want to go off on conspiracy theories, lone gunman and all that. But there's a lot of questions, which I know you've raised, and I raised with you in our first conversations. Is if you've ever seen the Secret Service come in and sweep a building, and I've been there for a lot of them at the baseball parks when the president would come to throw out a first pitch kind of thing. They send the team in a day or 2 in advance. I've been in hotels where they've done the sweeps. I've seen that. Did a convention, national convention, watched them do that. They're very meticulous. These guys are the best. And there's no question that they stand on the stage where the target is going to be standing, and they survey the landscape and see the high points and the line of sight, and everything is covered off. And that's why these incidents like Saturday are just almost unthinkable. Does that mean, that some nefarious activity was involved? No, but I'm sure that 50 years from now, they'll probably be asking the same question, because I doubt seriously, just like if we can't get the Warren Commission report, which was biased, they thought in the first place, how are we going to get honest details about what happened on Saturday?
I want to get into the career because you've touched on a bunch of different little topics. You've mentioned working in a ballpark, and so folks might want to hear a little bit about that. You've talked about how you got started. Let's go back to the beginning of your news career, if you would. I want to give people a lens because I've had multiple people reach out and say, really want to know how you ended up the way you did, because you're kind of an unusual guy. And so I ended up the way I did, I think, because I am my father's son was my only answer. Let's go back to your entry into the news business, how you got started doing radio, and give people kind of a glimpse of that, and we'll work our way forward.
This is the epitome of life for me, because my dad died when I was 12, and growing up, all I thought was it would be really awesome to know your children as adults. And I don't know how many other people have that feeling, but it was a driving force for me. I always thought how special it would be to be able to have an adult conversation with your son, because my father never had an adult conversation with me because I was 12 when he died. So I got into radio when I was 14 years old. It's a long story. Someday I'll write it in a book or something, but it was one of those, God things. And so I ended up working at the local radio station in a small town, northern Wisconsin. It's called Rhinelander. And while I was working there, I was blessed to have a really awesome mentor. And my mentor had he always talked about sacred trust, if you can believe that. When you're a 14-year-old kid and you get a job, you're making $2 an hour, which was more than most of the part-time jobs were paying in town. And it ended up being a full-time job because I took every shift I could take. but he talked about sacred trust, and he talked about the importance of getting it right. And we see that's gone from today's media. If you think about it, if we made a mistake on a news story throughout my career, from the time from the 1960s all the way through, if you made a mistake, it was a big deal. And you had to go back and you had to broadcast in radio and television. You had to broadcast a correction. In the newspaper, you couldn't bury the correction in the page 16. It was right out there on the front page, especially if it was a relatively important type of story. So the desire to be first was not what it is now. It was the desire to be right. So people, really good reporters, newspaper reporters, television, radio reporters back in the day, they held stories, not to hold them from the public, but to get another source, to go back and get 2 or 3 sources and really, really pinpoint that what they were saying was absolutely accurate, so that they didn't have to go back with egg on their face the next day. Well, we've lost that tradition. How many times do you see people go back and say, well, and we were really wrong about that? Like, we get into COVID later, but this is like, how many full-blown apologies have we gotten from the media about having completely missed the boat?
Was that
on COVID?
Do you believe that was the movement from journalism into activism, where people were trying to, because the headline actually sets the tone, and if the headline is false and we correct it later and you never see it, then I've still made that impression that I needed to, and I may move the needle for you. Is that kind of the?
Yeah.
Do you think the question is this? Do you think it was driven by the news cycle speed, or was it designed or moved by the people who were trying to change public impression?
It was moved by journalism schools who taught the concept of objectivity, and they drilled into the heads of their students that if you come to journalism school and we train you, when you leave here, you will be purely objective, and what you say will be objective. Well, that's about the most shallow lie that anybody could ever live with, because we all have our biases, and that's just natural. That's who we are. We've all come from different environments and different experiences. I talked about my dad dying young. Well, most people don't have that experience. So it changed me, and anybody who had a different experience, it changed them. Did you grow up in a big family, small family, big city, small town, all those things? And so just because you went through journalism school and you come out the other side doesn't mean that you haven't you've lost that you've lost all your background and your environment and your biases. So when I ran news operations, and I had a few of them, when I would talk to the team, I'd say, just leave that stuff, forget that concept, because that's false. You can't be unbiased. You can try, you can be fair. And you can say, okay, I really, in a political sense, I really hate this candidate. I think he is a devil personified, as we've heard about Trump, right? Or I think he's a fascist or Hitler or whatever. Mm-hmm. And if you think that, that's okay. You can still do the coverage. You have to fight that with everything you've got. And you have to go out of your way to find the opposite point of view of your natural bias. And when you do that, then you can do pretty good reporting. But when you pretend that your position is objective, even though it's subjective, then you're screwed. It doesn't work. And that's what we have.
I wonder if you give people kind of maybe a wave top, some of the weird moments that if somebody was going to scan through a history book, that you were either present at or you got to report on in a really meaningful way. And whenever I talk about you, I talk about things like Patty Hearst trial and things like weird moments in time where you just happened to be the guy that was there. And I also feel like I'm kind of doing the same thing. I happened to be in Portland in 2020, which was a weird moment. I happened to be in DC the day after that they tried to burn St. John's Church. These little moments that you just find yourself, God places you there, and you go, I don't know why I'm here, but I have it and I remember it, and it's allowed me to kind of congeal this view of the world. Maybe first most important news story, and then let's run forward to some of the other wild ones.
Okay, well, the first one is more contemporary. The most important one is probably more contemporary, and that's the Branch Davidians Waco and that story. So we had your mom and I had been out late the night before, and I'm not a late night guy, as you know. We probably stayed up till 3:00 in the morning. We went to we lived in a small town in Texas called Coppell, and they had the Coppell Gala the night before. So we went and stayed out with our realtor and the mayor and blah, 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 and all the people that lived in a small town. And they had a live band, and it was a wonderful party, and people stayed afterwards and had a couple cocktails and whatnot. And so when I woke up the next day, I definitely hungover, but we had to get up because we had another event at a convention center in Arlington, and it was the Neil Sperry Lawn and Garden Show, and the radio station was sponsoring it. And so we were over there walking around looking at the exhibits and everything, and my pager goes off. Okay, you remember pagers, right? And it's, call the station. So I kind of went like, and then it goes off again, and I go, okay, something's going on. And I call the news director, and the news director says, hey, we just got a call from the ATF. They just had this big shootout in Waco, and they want to know if we'll help them out and announce a ceasefire. And I went, oh, it's hard to find context and like in the moment. And I go, yeah, I help them do what they need. It's okay. And I'm on my way. So I left your mom and the rest of you guys and headed into the station. And from there, for probably the next 3 days, I don't think I slept more than 30 minutes at a crack, and it was just a really bizarre time. But what happened was the David Koresh, when the ATF after the raid, the ATF didn't trust the Branch Davidians didn't trust the ATF. And so there were wounded agents that were lying on the ground, but they couldn't send teams out to pull them back to safety because they thought they would be killed by the snipers inside the building, and vice versa. So everybody's at this standoff. The radio station announced the ceasefire, and the reason that the ATF called KRLD, which is a station that I was the manager of, is because David Koresh, Vernon Howell, who became David Koresh, listened to KRLD. That was his radio station of choice. He grew up in Garland, which is where the transmitter was, and he probably heard it He probably heard it when he didn't have the radio on, because there wasn't they didn't do a lot of safety things with big transmitters and tubes at the time. But in any event, so we announced a ceasefire, and then we started dealing directly with the ATF, and they would ask us to do certain things because the people inside the compound were asking them. And so we were the sort of go-between the government and the Branch Davidians. And then we got a call in the evening from inside the compound, and a young producer, I don't remember her name, but she came up to me and she said, I just got a call. There's a guy on the line. He claims to be calling from inside the compound. And I thought, it's probably a prank, because there used to be a lot of that too. We used to have a lot of fake bomb threats. Those happened like once a week, or people calling in and, fraternity jokes and whatever. So I thought, okay, better let me take it. So I went in and I started talking to this guy, and he turned out to be Steve Snyder, who was Koresh's right-hand man. And I kept asking him questions, and he said, well, I think David should, David should be the one to do that. Your mom's handing me stuff and telling me what to do here.
Thanks, Mom.
Show the Patriot cooler. Yeah, here's a Patriot cooler. Yeah.
You want to do a spot right now?
Yeah.
You want to break for a spot? We could do a Patriot cooler spot.
Okay, yeah. Here's a Patriot cooler. We've had this one since Kyle left it at the house, just when he started his podcast, I think.
There you go. All right, let me do a quick I think you guys got it earlier, but I could be wrong. No, I left it for you. You're right, folks. If you guys want to support our program and my dad's spot read right there, patriotcoolers.com, promo code KYLE, 4 letters, saves you 10%. It's Patriot Coolers. It's a family show. What you're seeing on the screen is a family minivan, rear end, whatever you call that, trunk space, and we keep our Patriot Cooler back there. It's the 50 quart in tan, because they didn't have the gray available. It's an awesome product. It looks really good. Everybody who sees it goes, oh man, I thought that was a box for keeping guns. I just had a family member tell us that the other day, one of my wife's family members. And I said, no, it's a cooler. It's for keeping food, which is more important than guns, but not by much. Folks, if you want to get your own, patriotcoolers.com. They have been our sponsor, as my dad just said, since we started the podcast all the way back to February of last year, which is awesome. Not everybody will stick with you for as long as they have, and they are great. They're out of Houston, Texas. Give them a look, and let's continue on. Okay, so you got your Patriot Cooler.
I don't know how much detail we want to do on this, Kyle, but I talked to Snyder for a little bit. I was asking him a question. He goes, well, I think David would have to answer that. I think David would have to answer that. And so then he said, well, why don't you go ahead and put him on? Now, we're not on a radio. I'm talking in the back room, a production studio at the radio station. So here comes David Koresh. And how do I know it's David Koresh? Well, David Koresh had made a call to CNN, and I've just listened to his voice. They put up a graphic, a picture of him on the phone. David Koresh, here he is talking, and I recognize the guy's voice. Well, he's nuttier than a fruitcake, and he's going on about the, birds shall eat of the flesh of the lamb, and blah blah blah. And he just is he's saying what sound like biblical verses, but they're not really biblical verses. They're made up stuff. And and I'm trying to get his attention, and I'm going, David, you have children in there. It's getting late. Don't you think you should let them come out, and so they can get a good night's sleep, and blah, blah, blah. And he's not paying any attention because he keeps calling himself Lamb. And then I have to step back and say, okay, how do I handle this? And I handle it on the fly. So I start calling the guy Lamb, and literally not Mr. Lamb or anything, just Lamb. And so I say Lamb, and he stops. And I go, David, don't you think you should release some of those children? And he goes, well, I don't know, is kind of thing. And then, but we're tracking, right? He's not just doing his stage performance of him as the Lamb of God. And that goes on for a while, and we're trying to get back and forth. And eventually they sent us something that he wrote, and we put it on the air, and we broadcast it every 15 minutes. And every 15 minutes we put it on the air. He released 2 children. You go back and look at the videos, the historical videos of it, you can see that there's the government cars are coming out, and you can see there are people in the back. There's probably a social worker with a couple of kids, and he released them 2 by 2 by 2 all night long. What we learned later is the children that he released were not his biological children. All his biological children he kept with him to go to the fiery end. So anyway, people often ask me is like, what's your take on Waco? The take is the ATF was in budget hearings in Congress. They're trying to make a big media splash. They invited the local television station to come in and cover their raid. Does that sound familiar? It all went south. The agents got killed, which we saw. I got a letter later on from allegedly from an ATF agent who said that some of those who were killed by friendly fire. That was never a part of the record. So, and every one of these big stories that the government is involved in, that's the biggest one for me. It's just a lot of questions. They said that somebody blew their cover. Well, they went into a small town in Texas, like a one-horse town, right, with one tavern which sold pizza, and a whole bunch of them showed up in their black uniforms and went in to have a beer and some pizza the night before the raid. Now, who blew their cover? It was the television station that blew their cover. I don't think so, folks. You just don't do things like that. You have to have some common sense. If you're really going to do a stealth operation, you're not going to show up the night before in a small town in mass, 20, 30 agents. So it was a disaster from the get-go. And talked to Koresh, released some kids, everything. And the great irony of it all is that I was at the station pretty much every day. I went on the Today Show with Bryant Gumbel 2 days in a row. I did an interview with Larry King. I did all this stuff. I'm doing, and they're all asking me questions, and I'm kind of tap dancing because I don't want to say this guy is nuttier than a fruitcake because I didn't know if he was listening or not. Right. And I didn't want to, throw a match on a gallon of gasoline. And so at the end of it, I went to Las Vegas to pick up an award for the radio station. We won a national award called the Crystal Award for community service. And I'm getting ready to go into the auditorium, go on the stage. And my news director, Rick Erickson, called and said, turn on your TV. And turn it on. I watched it burn down like everybody else did. But You know, it was just messed up from the get-go. There was nothing right about it. It was all wrong.
You've and maybe I remember this wrong, so it'll be interesting to see if this aligns with your memory of the time. But there's always been the conspiracy, and if you listen to the way people talk about it, they conflate what happened at Ruby Ridge, which was clearly a government screw-up. I've actually learned more about it from people that actually knew people there, and said that the government basically did have rules of engagement, and what they believed, the way they wrote it up, whether it's true or not, is that that Randy Weaver pointed a rifle up at a helicopter, and that caused them to take the shot. It wasn't a proactive shot. It was a man with a rifle who was pointing and targeting a government helicopter. That made them take the shot, which of course missed Randy Weaver, hits his wife and baby, and so we have that. The story has always been the government actually lit the fire and burned the Branch Davidians out, which you've never believed, as far as I recall. But the thing that I remember you telling me at the time, and we'll see if this holds, you told me that he spoke about himself, David Koresh spoke about himself in the past tense, which is a really, really weird device to be able to use. And I challenge anybody to go out and talk about yourself in the past tense on any given day. That's a mindset. And is that your recollection still?
Absolutely. And when I got off that interview, even though I never mentioned it in the national, you know, when I went on the Today Show with Brian Gumbel, I never said this, but as soon as I finished talking to Koresh, I told the people in the newsroom, they will never get him out alive. That man has a death wish. He's a dead man. And that everything in his choice of words, everything in his frame of reference was whacked out, and he was already in the way he presented himself, he was already dead. And so, you know, people say, well, the FBI started the fire and come to, no. Right. The other thing is, if you just look at the simple logistics of it, there are a couple of things. One, a lot of the victims who died in the fire, when they went in and did the autopsies, and one of my friends is very close personal friends with the doctor who performed the autopsies. The vast majority of the victims at Waco were shot in the head. That's how they died. They didn't die from smoke inhalation or from the fire. Number one. Okay. That's not we're going to fight back and the government's going to try to burn us. The second thing is, when they broke into one end of the building and put the tear gas canisters or whatever they shot in there with the tank, almost instantly the fires started on the other end of the compound, and they burned. It just went up like crazy. Now I'm not a scientist. I can't tell you, but just from observation, that just didn't look right. But you know, why were so many people shot in the head? And it doesn't add up. So I don't think the government at that point, I think they got impatient. They didn't have to be. They could have waited there, and they could have waited. What's the difference? But it was bad PR for the government. So the government went in and did something that ended up being even worse PR, because it spawned all the conspiracy theories that the government was trying to murder all these people. But anybody who impregnates 12-year-old girls and does the things that he did, this was a really evil man who was he was deranged. He was, you know, my phrase, which I got from my mother, is nuttier than a fruitcake.
When we think about somebody going and putting bullets in the head of their survivor, here's the other thing. Like, once the autopsy is being done, we're talking about it post-fire, so they're not going to be able to tell the age or when the person died. You're going to lose all those different signs that we'd otherwise, because they cooked them. And so the evidence is destroyed. So yeah, they can tell a great narrative afterwards. And there were some survivors of the Branch Davidian compound that came out and said other things. But this illusory truth, which we talk about in this program, and I know a lot of people didn't have a name for it until I went and talked about it, and I didn't have a name for it either. But illusory truth is, I heard something, it was repeated, I believe it. The new information comes out and it unseats it, but it's really hard to do that. I want to compare the David Koresh situation, the shooting in the head, to Jonestown, because I know that you were doing news when Jonestown happened. Maybe tell people some background about what that was, just for the younger listeners. And you know, people don't know where that phrase came from, drink the Kool-Aid, but that's where it came from. Yeah. So let's talk about it.
So 909 people died. I think that's the number. It was over 900 people died at Jonestown. And the weird thing for me was, I was a news guy in San Francisco, and Jim Jones came into town as, like, you know, riding on a white horse. And he was saving all these people, these poor downtrodden people and drug addicts. And they had a drug rehab thing. And and poor people that were on welfare, and he was lifting them up, and he was really highly recognized as a modern day hero. And especially with the officials of the Democrat Party in San Francisco and the state of California, they had big banquets in his honor, fundraisers, and they were all there. Willie Brown and all these people would show up, and congressmen, he was one of the characters of the time. There was another guy there at the same time named Cecil Williams, who had a big black church and had the best rock and roll band at a church probably in the history of the world. And people flocked in they came from other states, to come in and hear this band on Sunday in his services. And he'd get up and preach, and he was dynamic. And anyway, Jim Jones was of the same ilk. He was white, but he wore, dark sunglasses, and he was, a little different, but everybody thought he was just the most wonderful guy in the world. And all of a sudden he announces that he's going to set up this colony in Guyana, and he moves to Guyana, and a bunch of people go down, and a bunch more people go down, a bunch more people come down. Then his stories start coming back. Like some of them that got down there and thought they were going to the promised land ended up in this sweaty jungle with mosquitoes and nasty, and it wasn't very well developed. And so they wanted to come home, but then they weren't allowed to come home. And they called their parents, their friends or their parents or their family or whatever, and said, "Oh, I don't like it here, but I don't know how to get out." And so it got to the point where it went like, well, what's really going on? Because this is this big celebrity. You have to think of somebody who's a mainstream celebrity. And now all of a sudden
Tony Robbins going down and doing it. Like somebody who's got everybody thinks he's a guru. Everyone thinks he's a great guy, that kind of thing.
Yep. A wonderful guy. And now all of a sudden we're getting his doubts. And so, Congressman Ryan decides to take a delegation down there, and he's going to go and do an investigation. And he brings reporters with him and photographers and all this stuff. And they go down and have these negotiations or discussions, and people like Jim Jones or even David Koresh, and I say he's nuttier than a fruitcake, but they're really smart, and they are manipulative. They're exceptionally quick with words and answers and lies. And so they kind of work through this thing, and the congressman goes like, okay, yeah, well, it's okay. Things are okay here. I'm going to go back and give my report and tell everybody it's kind of okay. And because he interviews all these people, and Jim Jones knows he's going to talk to Mary or Sally or Bill or whoever, and he tells them whatever he tells them, he threatens them and says, if you say anything, we're going to cut your head off, or whatever he's going to do. And so they're all afraid. And so they all tell the congressman, they go, are you happy here? Oh yeah, very happy. Are things okay here? Yeah, everything's okay. And because they're intimidated. And so he gets all these interviews, and the people say everything's cool. And so he gets ready to go back on but for some reason, Jones in his mind envisions that this is a threat, and that this is not going to work out the way the congressman said it would, or he doesn't trust the congressman or whatever. And so they attack the airplane. They start shooting people. They kill the congressman. Some people escape on the plane, the Cessna down the runway, and get away. And it's all, covered. And then the rest of them, we say drink the Kool-Aid. Technically, it wasn't Kool-Aid. I forgot the name of the brand, but it was something like Kool-Aid, some kind of powdered flavored drink that they put in. And I think they used cyanide, but I'm not positive of that, but some kind of poison. And they had them, and they said that it took the children died in 5 to 10 minutes, and the adults were dying. And then some of them, had looked around and went, oh, this is not good, but I think some of them were forced to, and a couple of them were shot, because they weren't going to drink the Kool-Aid. So when we say drink the Kool-Aid, we're talking about a relatively modern story in American history where a really bizarre person, and both of Jim Jones and Vernon Howell, they got carried away with themselves. They thought they were gods, quite literally. And a lot of people died because of it. And both of those stories, one of them, because the government was so involved in, like David Koresh would go into town. He went into Waco all the time. He was in the hardware store, he's in the grocery store, he's in the post office. They could have gone and picked him up just without incident. It was just, but they wanted to have a big raid. They wanted to have some show of force, and and make a big story so they could play the video for Congress and get more money in their budget. That's the bottom line on that story.
Sure.
Jim Jones was a different kind of thing. It was just kind of a mad thing, but it's interesting that he had a lot of government support to the point where the government of Guyana bent all these rules and let them bring things in without paying tariffs. And it was those were two real weird stories.
Well, there's more than that even, because you touched on the San Francisco angle. So I just immediately thought of Harvey Milk. I know you had interviewed George Wallace or been at a press conference days before he had gotten shot. So, I mean, we're looking at this time like it's never happened before. It actually has. We have these weird patterns. We're in the pattern of chaos right now. And it seems like maybe the mid to late 60s, the 70s got really weird. Do you think it's as weird now or weirder?
Until the last couple of days, I thought it was weirder now, but then I've gone back and I've refreshed my memory because as I said, the news cycle comes and I'm like, most of the people who are listening or watching today, we consume so much information that stuff gets pushed to the back. And even though I knew about it, I wasn't consciously aware of it. So I went back and kind of look at some of these stories, but I'm going to go all the way back to 1968 to try to make it relevant to what we're seeing. In 1968, I was a senior in high school. My boss called me and said, hey, the Republican presumptive nominee is coming to town for a speech, Richard Nixon, and I want you to go down and handle it. So I went down to what we had one big building where you could have a crowd of people. It's called the Memorial Building. I went down there, and it was my first experience with an advanced team. Now, I don't have I believe that there were Secret Service among the advanced team, but whether they were or not, because Richard Nixon had been vice president for a number of years before 68, they had these out-of-town guys dressed in black suits and, shirt and tie. They were all buttoned up. And when they came in, I saw them transform a building. And I had never seen that before because we had a stage. You'd walk in the main door off the main street and go across the gymnasium floor, the basketball court, and then there was a stage at the other end of the building. When they came in, they built a new stage along the left side of the building. And the reason they did it is because of ingress and egress, that the candidate could come in through an alleyway and a side door, not have to be out in the public eye, and they could get them out quickly. And I learned about what's called a mult box. And in today's technology, it doesn't mean anything, but I had never seen one before, and I was fascinated by it. They said the candidate doesn't like to have more than one microphone in front of him, and so everybody runs off the same microphone. I go, well, how do you do that? Well, they had this box that you plugged into with your tape recorder or your broadcast unit, whatever you were using, and it took the signal off one microphone and distributed it to multiple sources. So the TV coverage that was following the vice president at the time, who was a Republican candidate, ended up, being elected. There were so many things that were different, and I saw this efficiency, and I went, wow, I was so blown away by how precise they were. And then when you talk to these guys, they say, who are you? And I tell them, they go, okay, well, this is your deal. This is where you are. This is what you do. This is, and I got the idea of how they would scope a building and do the advanced work. Well, then you forward ahead 4 years later, and George Wallace is a candidate, Democrat candidate for president. A lot of national support. I think he got 13% of the vote in 72. So he comes I'm in college now, he comes into Appleton, and I go to cover him at an auditorium. And I remember I couldn't get my microphone up on the mic stand, but they didn't have a mult box. So I have a tape recorder and a microphone, and I'm reaching my hand up in the air, trying to hold the microphone up. And I will never forget the feeling. As soon as he started talking, and he is spitting out hatred. He was a staunch segregationist. If people don't know, read about Georgia Governor George Wallace. I was frightened to death, and I kept ducking down. I thought, somebody's going to shoot this sumbitch. There's no question they're going to shoot him because, listen to what he's doing. And there were protesters there, and there were supporters there, And it was kind of divided along racial lines, and the black people were protesting, and the white people were, rednecks, and they're going, yeah, 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 and everything. And I went like, oh man. And when it was over, I was drained. I thought, whoa, that was scary to be in that room and covering this guy. And about 2 weeks later, he got shot in Maryland at a shopping center. And so it's like, okay, that's almost like a premonition. But he didn't have that same type. He didn't have a Secret Service detail, as I recall, and he didn't have those people around him. He just had his own security and ended up getting shot and paralyzed because of it by a kind of a wacko guy who followed him around from state to state, and Arthur Bremer. But they're all these experiences with having watched the Secret Service back to the contemporary time. So we're not just living in the past. When you see how thorough they are, and Kyle, I know in your career in law enforcement with the FBI, I know you've said a lot of times, then maybe it was the military training more, but there's just a precision. There's a focus and a precision that certain people have, and the Secret Service, in my experience, really had it. And back in the day, the FBI had it. I dealt with the ATF and the Koresh thing, and then all of a sudden the FBI came in and took over, and it was night and day. I mean, it was like the ATF, dealing with the ATF at the time was like dealing with your not too bright neighbor. I'm, not a bad person or anything, but boy, they just didn't have their act together. I had one come into my office at the radio station and ask me to turn over some tapes. And I said, just, give me a subpoena. We have a policy, a company policy. You give me this subpoena. I got the tape right here. It's in my drawer. I'll hand it to you. And he said, come on, man. He goes, the bank down in Waco gave us his bank records without a subpoena. And I thought, that's a violation of federal law. And here is a federal agent telling me this. That's the ATF guy. FBI comes in, it was all buttoned up. I mean, they just changed. One of the other funny stories, which I shared with you, which people have never heard, is in the beginning, the ATF, and I told you this was a time of farces and fake bomb threats and all kind of weird stuff going on. So I was very cautious. And when the ATF guy said, okay, well, our agents are going to call you, and if they call you and ask you to do something or say something, we really appreciate your help. And I went, no, wait. We got to have some kind of a signal. So I don't want some crank calling in and telling me something, and we put it on the air and we cause a bigger problem than we've already got. So we have to have a signal. And the ATF agent in charge said, well, how about if they say their name, this is agent so-and-so, and my social security number is, and they give you the social security number. And then you can write them down and you'll be able to match them. And I went, well, okay, that sounds good to me, right? I don't care. So you want to give me your social security number? And we did. And they called in and they would say, this is agent so-so, social security number, We'll write it down. Okay, good. Okay, agent, what can we do for you, right? So that was an inside thing that kept us safe from being pranked. So the FBI comes in and takes over, and the agent in charge, Jeff Jamar, I believe was his name. And so I go, well, Agent Jamar, I said, we've been doing this thing, and so we're going to ask your agents to give us their social security number. And I'll never forget, he just laughed. He just laughed. He said, that was so funny. He was like, nah, I don't think so. And I said, okay, well, what can we do? He says, how about date of birth? So I went, okay, that's fine. And so the ATF did it with social security numbers, and the FBI did it with date of birth. This is agent so-and-so, date of birth, and we write it down. And they call back again. We know it's them, and we did it. So it's a lot of funny sidebar things that happen when you're dealing with the government.
Yeah, well, you mentioned that there's a degree of precision and competency. I think it's actually incompetency, having seen it and have a high bar of evaluation for this kind of stuff. But I pulled up a quote here that's been ringing around in my head. Sometimes these things happen. I don't know if it's inspiration, Holy Spirit, take your pick. But I saw it. My wife made me rewatch Sherlock, this remake of Sherlock Holmes, and some of the stories about that they did on the BBC in 2009. And it's a famous quote. It comes from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle writing it. Obviously, this is an actual Sherlock Holmes quote from the books. He says, when you've eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. And we've seen Spock say it, the old Spock and the new Spock. This is the quintessential version of a detective logic. And that's what people are looking at right now. So I'm always encouraging people. I was on InfoWars last night, right? And I get to talk to Owen Schroyer. And InfoWars is willing to go a little bit weirder, maybe than some of the other programs that I've been on or that you've been a part of. So the question is always like, okay, how do we evaluate things skeptically? And there are weird things that have happened, no doubt. Like some of the weirdest things have actually happened. They're weirder than any sort of writer would have come up with or any sort of operation would come up with. So we have to remember, once we've eliminated what's not possible, and that's really hard to do right now because the government doesn't like to tell us the story, then we see whatever's improbable, that is the truth. Even if we can't prove it right now, we can rule out the opposite. What are some of the like weirder than fiction? If somebody had written it, it would have gotten thrown out and nobody would have bought the rights to the movie things that you were seeing.
Oh gosh. The Patty Hearst trial. I mean, Patty Hearst was kidnapped, and my one of my reporters who was working for me in San Francisco, not before I went to CBS, I was working at an independent FM radio station. We had I think we had four street reporters on our staff, but he happened to be in the neighborhood when they cornered Patty Hearst and arrested her and brought her in. So we were all focused, and we had all been focused on the story anyway. It was a huge story. So there's a young heiress to the Hearst fortune. Randolph Hearst was the biggest newspaper publisher. It was in the movie business and super wealthy, an Elon Musk type of his era. And his granddaughter is kidnapped. She's 19 years old. She's living with a grad student in Berkeley at the University of California. And his name is Stephen Weed, and he's a slimeball. And anyway, and she's kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army. And the SLA holds her captive for, I think it was 16 months. And most of the time she's held in a closet, in an attic closet. And she's repeatedly raped. She's, they beat her up. She weighed, when she was arrested, she weighed 87 pounds. This is a tiny woman, just a little skinny thing, and by then she's 20 years old. So we go in and I watch, and I had the opportunity. I got my name in the lottery thing, and I got a front row seat, and I went to the trial, and I was fascinated by trials. I've been to quite a few trials. And I sat there, and much better than government meetings, I have to say, because there's a lot of nuance. But so I'm in there watching, and I'm going like, oh man, this is awful. What happened to this little girl? Even though she's rich and people didn't like her in one sense, and they had been photographs of her in a bank robbery at a Hibernia bank holding a rifle M16 and blah blah blah. So I watched the whole trial, and the judge, when the defense is presenting information, is literally resting his eyes, right? He's like sleeping during the thing. I'm going like, whoa, this is weird. And then the defense attorney seems like he's hungover or something, because F. Lee Bailey, one of the most famous criminal attorneys in the United States at the time, he was a really big deal. Johnny Cochran, if people, know those names of the big ones that are the national hero. He's awful. He's not picking up on anything. And I'm sitting there going like, well, why do you ask this? Or why don't you do that? And he's just missing the whole thing. And the jury comes back and finds her guilty of bank robbery and hold a potential sentence of 22 years in prison or something like that. And they ended up giving her 7 years. And I think she served maybe 22 months, and President Carter commuted her sentence after a while. But it's like, is this really happening? And so when you sit through something like that, and you listen and you watch and you pay attention, and the outcome is bizarre, you wonder, and the government was involved in that prosecution too. They went in full bore. Justice Department was there. They had representatives, FBI agents were on the scene, and when she was arrested and all that. And I met Stephen Weed, her boyfriend, because he wrote a book about it, tried to capitalize on it, wrote the book and did a book tour. And he came in, and I interviewed him. And if you ever have, and I know you have this, Kyle, it's something, I don't know if it's hereditary or if I think all humans have it. We just don't pay attention to it. But I call it the 15-second rule. You come into someone's presence, within about 15 seconds, you can go, nope, not this one. This is not good. Or you go, yeah. Sometimes you can talk yourself into trusting someone or believing in someone. But most times your gut is right and your first impression is right. And as soon as he walked in the room, I went, nah, this is a bad person. He is bad. And he was just as I said, he is a slime ball.
You can actually read a book about that if people are interested. It's called The Gift of Fear. It's written by a guy named Gavin DeBecker, who runs a security organization. It's the people that are actually doing the protection for RFK Jr. And he says exactly that your intuition is actually your body and your mind, your eyes, your auditory senses, all doing millions and millions of calculations in a split second. And as you go in and assess people, and it's the story that he says, he's done all these different interviews of people that were victims of crimes. And he said the most common thing you hear about when somebody recognized, or, they weren't ambushed, but they were attacked sort of quote unquote out of nowhere. The answer is always, I should have known. He said it's the most common phrase you hear from victims. I got in the elevator with that guy and something didn't feel right. I should have known. And his statement is, and the gift of fear is that you did know. You actually did know. You've just been socialized to not accept your body's own calculation because you don't have a cerebral answer for it. But he said human beings are the only animals in the world that will climb into an enclosed space or walk into a crowd or go someplace where they have fear and they know better, but they've been socialized out of it. And so that's why you get a lot of these folks that you're like, well, they should have never been there in the first place. They knew it too. Anyway, Gavin DeBecker's book is pretty interesting if people want to kind of open their mind up to why we actually do have some really special senses. God's given us an opportunity to actually discern truth before we know why, right?
There's a story from President Reagan a month or so before he got shot, and he was with his wife at the Ford Theater, and they were watching a play. And he had just been inaugurated, as the story goes. I don't know if this is true or not. It's hearsay, so I wasn't there. But I think he wrote in one of his memoirs that he had that feeling like, oh, I could be shot. And it came over him, was a strong feeling. And then a couple of weeks later, a month later, or whatever, he actually was shot. So I think that there are, I don't know what that is, but I'm sure that you can explain it in a technical sense much better. But we have foreshadowing of things, and we have instincts about things. We have instincts about people. We have instincts about places in certain situations. Something doesn't feel right. Better. I always, one of my mantras is pay attention to the signs, watch the signs, because if you become more aware, then you're in a position to be able to do your best to protect yourself and your family and those around you. But if you're just unaware or stuck in your smartphone, bad things happen.
I'm too young to remember the Reagan situation, but I know that was front and center with you. You had some real poignant Reagan memories. You want to kind of walk through, people are not seeing that coalescence, that congealing of America behind somebody who's shot in the way that they did in, what was it, 1983? Is that, what year was Reagan shot?
1981 at the Hilton Hotel in DC, John Hinckley Jr.
All right. So let's talk Reagan. Let's talk about that moment, maybe in contrast to what we're seeing today in America post Trump getting shot.
Well, I'm going to go back before that.
I can't wrangle you. People know this in the chat. They're seeing this. They're like, we just let them go.
Okay. So I knew President Reagan as Governor Reagan. When he was elected governor of California, he came through San Francisco on a regular basis. Always had a press event. He was really, he loved the cameras, he loved the microphones, and it was, he was so congenial, and he was such a good performer. But the one Reagan story that I have to tell before we talk about the shooting is I went to a press conference one time, and I raised my hand, asked a question, and he looked right at me, and he gave me an answer that had absolutely, and I'm not saying a little bit off, it had nothing to do with the question I asked him. He gave me a completely separate thing, but it was one of his, and I learned later how they do it with spin doctoring. You take a word or a phrase that you hear, and then you connect it to some message that you want to get out there. So he didn't answer the question, but he gave an answer, and everybody in the room knew it. I mean, all the other reporters in San Francisco, unlike Milwaukee, Chicago, Detroit, New York, a lot of other East Coast and central media markets, it was a very friendly market. So if a reporter was being, wasn't being answered, then people would be patient. So I said, follow, which is the language, right? Raise my hand, follow. And I asked the same question a second time. He gave me another answer, non-responsive, had nothing to do with the question, but it was another one of his talking points that he wanted to give. And now everybody in the room, and you're looking around, you see the guy from the TV station, you see the guys from the newspaper and the other radio station, they all know. And we're all kind of laughing. We're just going like, yeah, this is funny. It's like he just gave two answers, but not to the question. So that's very rare that you get a third follow, but I raise my hand, I go follow, and everybody's quiet. Nobody else is trying to ask the question because they want to see what's going to happen next. I asked him the same question, the original question, the third time, and he gave a completely different answer, not responsive to the question that I asked. So I thought, wow, and they called him the great communicator, right? It's like he had his deal. He knew what he wanted to say, and it didn't matter what questions you ask. Fast forward in the debate, everybody talks about the most recent debate, how bad Biden was. He was asleep at the switch. And, President Trump did exactly the same thing. If they asked him a question, he never answered any of their questions. Jake Tapper, and he'd ask a question and he just said, well, yeah, but that's a nice question, but here's what I want to say. And it's like, okay, that's how we've evolved. And people didn't even pay attention to it. I don't think. I don't hear anybody really talking about it, saying like, oh, well, he gave good answers of points that he wanted to make, but he didn't answer questions. Right. And this has been going on forever and ever. So Reagan got shot. It's a ricochet in the background of it. It said they used to, even the agents, the Secret Service agents, they normally wore their protective vests. Right. And they had the president wearing one, but they didn't that day. And the reason was because they only had a 30-foot space that they were going to be exposed. It was from the hotel door to the car. And they thought it was such a small space. They had a good team on it, but there were crowds pressing in because people wanted to be around President Reagan and whatnot. And they shot and missed, but it ricocheted and it hit him anyway. And then it shot and James Brady and messed up his brain. And, he lived for a long time, but he was never the same. And President Reagan was never the same after that. So was there, I think the bravery of the agents who were on the scene, the same thing as there's a lot being said about the putting yourself in harm's way. And one of the Secret Service agents, when Reagan was shot, actually put his arms wide and took as wide a stance as he possibly could and got shot in the chest. So it's like, that's
uncommon bravery.
Yeah, it just really was. It's special, and there are so many special people like that in government service. Unfortunately, there's all these undercurrents, particularly from the first three that we talk about: the JFK, the Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy. A lot of weird stuff that's been going on. So as the conspiracy theorists come out of the woodwork and they have all their theories about, why was that roof unmanned, and how did he get up there, and why didn't somebody react quicker when people were shouting there's a man on the roof and a guy with a gun and all that stuff. And we're going to be hearing that for years. I don't expect, based on my background and what I've seen in history, I don't ever expect that we're ever going to get an answer that they're going to, it was a sloped roof. It would have been too dangerous, which I heard you talk about yesterday. And I think it's funny. It's just funny. It's like, it's not funny, but it is funny. It's just like, what's going on? Who dropped the ball? And I guess that's the other thing. You go back to Afghanistan. It's like, who dropped the ball? How come no one was ever fired? That was obvious break with standard operating procedure. Why wasn't anyone ever held accountable? At least in the JFK thing, Jack Ruby came in and solved everybody's problem by, here's a guy with terminal cancer and goes in and gets up real close and kills the alleged assassin. So okay, you can't get answers from dead people.
Right. Or that just sews up the problem and now we've got it tied off. That's a really good way to end an op, is that everybody dies. So that's confusing. You brought up Afghanistan. You brought up the withdrawal, the Abbey Gate situation. You didn't serve in the military. You did cover a lot of events. I know you saw friends go off to Vietnam and things like that. Can you tell me why? And I actually don't know the answer to this at all. Why did the situation at Abbey Gate move you so much to put up what is essentially a combat memorial in your front yard, which, if people don't know, there's what, 50 feet of your street line is covered with flags and lights and crosses and the stories of all the people that died on that day. What made you do that? Like in your 70s, why did that moment make you dedicate a piece of property to that time in America?
Well, the simple answer is when you were still in the Bureau and living in New Mexico, your mom saw a small monument that someone had erected with 13 crosses to those people. But that was a story that just really grabbed my attention because the same thing, the things we're talking about today, we're talking about purpose, government precision in operations. And even though I haven't been in the military, it's just common sense. And everyone know, and right from the get-go, I went like, well, what in the world? You evacuate the civilians first. You don't evacuate the soldiers first. That just doesn't make any sense. Who would do that? No one. That is just dumb. And then you watch it play out. So you've already asked the hard question, and the hard question is, why would someone pull all of the protective forces out of a country and leave the civilians to fend for themselves? That's illogical. And then you get into they wanted this to happen or wanted that to happen. I don't know what their motives were, but it was just dumb. And I guess that's the thing that's always bothered me. It's the same thing I mentioned in Waco. It's like, if you want to have a surprise raid, you don't have your agent show up in their black garb and go into a little tavern a few miles away from where you're going to do the raid the night before the raid. It's just, those are the questions that you don't have to be genius. You don't have to be a law enforcement official or a military expert or anything else. You just have to be able to formulate some really simple questions. And when you ask the really simple questions and there are no answers forthcoming, there's nothing coming back, there's no excuse for it, then you become skeptical. And that's probably how you got to be as skeptical as you were, because I've been seeing this stuff through my whole life, all things that didn't add up. And we talked about them, I'm sure, around the kitchen table when you were a kid. It's like, God, I don't understand. How could this happen? Who would do that? Who would do such a thing?
We talked about a concept of tolerance stacking, and I got some feedback that was really useful to people. George Hill told me that it made sense to him. For those who have mechanical minds, engineering minds, the idea that everybody is having the worst day within the capability, whatever the appropriate level of performance. If you're at your worst, and that your guy that's hungover, the F. Lee Bailey that shows up, and he's doing the job, but he's not doing it well because he's an attorney, but he's a weak one on that day, let's say. If everybody's doing the worst job that they do that day, and you stack all of those weaknesses up, failure, incompetence, not paying attention, not showing up on time, punctuality, and so on, then you can get something that doesn't function. You could take a machine that every individual part is still within spec, even if it's at the lowest end of the spec, the sloppiest version of it. But when you stack up, the machine won't work. That's what tolerance stacking does. And so the question is, somebody decided it was a 30-foot walk for Ronald Reagan to go into a hotel. And so we don't need the vest. We're not going to make him put it on today. We're not going to recommend he put it on. And that also happens to be the day that some guy woke up and decided, I'm the craziest I've ever been, and I'm going to take a shot at the president, and I might die doing so. Uh-huh. And then, the people who are running the police line, they are doing their worst day where they're not paying attention to people that are sneaking past them and so on. And so you get a stack of these things. Reagan got shot. Trump got shot. The country is radically different now than it was in 1981. I was born in 1981. So the world we're living in is very different. The reaction that Americans had, what changed in the American, psyche, what changed in the way that Americans think of themselves so that a guy getting shot almost in the head didn't make everybody go, this is a guy that is doing something. We got to stand behind that. But we don't do that as Americans.
I don't know. I told you, and I don't know if it's pure coincidence or if there was a relationship, but the day after George Wallace got shot and he was wounded, they had primary elections in America. And George Wallace, Democrat candidate, segregationist, won Michigan, the Democratic primary in Michigan, with 51% of the vote. Now, it's people, Biden's thing, you ain't black if you don't vote for me kind of thing. it's like, really? How did all that come about? Because the segregationist, George Wallace, was a Democrat, and he won about 13% of the national vote. He won Maryland that same day, the day after he got shot. So did it have something to do with him being shot? Nah, I don't think so. I think it was just there, but it's sort of goes. So will that affect President Trump? Will people come over? It doesn't seem like it. If you watch the media, it doesn't seem like there's been a significant movement toward we gotta pull together. They say we have to take the rhetoric down, right? That's what we hear from the left, is we got to take the rhetoric down. Well, excuse me? I want to hear the apology. I want you to go back to the tape that you made and the statements you made and say, I said this and it was wrong, and I apologize. Don't tell the other guys to take the rhetoric down. What is that? That's just goofy. That doesn't make any sense at all. So we're in the upside down world. We've been here for quite a while. I don't know when we got to it, but we're definitely in the upside down world. And it's not people. I've got my idea. Don't confuse me with the truth. That's what I've used that phrase a lot too. I haven't used it for a long time. I haven't even thought about it, but I've got my opinion. Don't confuse me with the truth. I don't want to really look at things because I am really wed to my idea. I believe this. I believe it firmly. I believed it for a long time, and I will continue to believe it. And I don't care what you put in front of me. I'm not going to think differently. And I think that's where we are. We say, well, the country is divided. No, we got a bunch of people who are sleepwalking. And then we have a bunch of people who are awake. And then there's a bunch in between that are sort of confused and not really well informed. And so many Americans right now, Kyle, don't want to be involved. They don't want to know. They don't want to hear it.
This is the analogy that people are, I think historically they look at it and they go, oh my God, someone took a shot at the former president, a guy who may be president again. We're better than that as Americans. And if everybody is threatened by that guy, then I'm behind it. You get up, and like, even if you didn't want Rocky to win, even if you were an Apollo Creed fan, you cheer for Rocky because he's the underdog. He stands up, he battled through it, and he wins. The people that are in the middle right now that were Apollo Creed fans, let's say, and maybe they weren't really that aggressive. They were just there to see Apollo Creed, and Rocky does a good job. Those people are looking at Trump standing up, not as this is the victory of the American spirit. This is what America does. America gets knocked down, stands back up. It is the shining city on the hill and so on. They're like, this is a natural disaster. This is Hurricane Trump. And even though I don't feel strongly one way or another about the guy, I'm terrified because he brings people that will shoot him into the world. And if somebody is willing to shoot this guy, then that means more chaos for me and my family, and I'm scared of it. So I just freeze. And I said there's like kind of two things in the sympathetic nervous system that we like to focus on, the fight and the flight, right? But the third one is freeze. If you've ever worked in medicine, you know that. And I think I've shared that with you. I think the third one has gone from freeze to film now because we got weirdos that when things go wrong, they don't just lock up and hunker down. They actually like grab it and try and get on social media and go viral. So we're seeing all of that weird play, right? Like we're just seeing some of the dumbest people operate under new programming that didn't exist when I was born. It didn't exist when you were covering news. We're dealing with different people. The millennials have a phrase, or the Gen Z have a phrase, like built different. And so people are just built different today. Like they just are. They just do things that don't make sense to me, or maybe you. I think a lot of our audience that kind of leans towards my age bracket or older is just going, who the hell are these people? And how come they don't react the way that people do in America? And that may be it. They're scared. They're seeing a scary thing.
They're wired. I think about how many people you know who sleep with their phone next to their bed, and if they wake up in the middle of the night, they have to reach over and grab it to see if they got an email or a text. Mm-hmm. They just or they have to go to their favorite social media site and get the latest in the middle of the night, 2:00 in the morning, whatever.
Right.
It's like, what's that all about? That's unhuman. I'm sorry, but it's just not natural. Natural is you listen with your ears and you see with your eyes, and you are aware of your world, and you live in that world. That's the real world. And you react to the things that you can actually make a difference. You know, you don't step in the hole and fall down, or you don't hit your head on the tree limb when you're walking through the forest because you're paying attention. If you're locked in your phone, you're in a different universe. I'm sorry. And it's not a parallel universe. It's just a screwed up one. and you are going to step in the hole. You're going to trip. You're going to hit your head on the branch because you're not paying attention. You think you're up to date because you have all this technology, but the technology is not the answer, and it never has been. And I think that's where people get into that mode, like you said. They just now I have to get my phone. I got to get a picture. I got to get a video of it. I'm see, I wonder how many clicks I can get on this thing if I post it right away. It's like, come on. We're losing our ability to react as human beings, and that is scary. And when you take it back into the journalism conversation or news conversation that we're having at the beginning, that's what made really great reporters. They were really great reporters because they were curious and they were aware. They always had their eyes and their ears open, and they listened for things. I can tell stories, we could go on for more time than anybody would ever bother to listen. But I have one, which is a favorite story I'll share. This has nothing to do with anything, but it's just it's a fun thing. I went to a speech. I was working in Miami, Florida, and I went to a speech one time, and George Meany was the president of the AFL-CIO, the top labor leader in the United States of America. It was at the Doral Hotel. There were probably 2,000 people in the audience, and a lot of support and everything. So I'm going to cover it as a newsman. And he's up there and he's making his statements and he's talking about being a friend of the working man and blah, 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 and everything. And he's getting, the union guys are all cheering and all that and everything. And it's like, I'm going like, God, this is bizarre. This is a really weird situation. And I walked out, and, I'm not going to get to ask a question because I'm a local radio reporter. So I walked out of the hotel and I'm standing on the sidewalk and kind of trying to figure out what I'm going to do for a story. And, George Meany's visit to Miami that day, and who walks out? George Meany. And he's all by himself. And he's just standing there. He's got the cigar hanging out of his mouth. And so I go, oh, cool. So I hit the record button on my portable tape recorder, and I walked up and I go, hi, Mr. Meany, I wonder if I could just ask you a question. And he goes, who are you? And I go, I'm Charlie Seraphin. And he goes, well, what local, who you with? I said, I'm with the WMYQ, local radio station here, just a couple blocks away, actually. And he says, what local are you with? And I go, no, we're not union. I'm just independent. But anyway, I just have a real simple question for you, Mr. Meany. You're always talking about being a friend of the working man, right? And so I just wonder, how much money do you make? And he turns and he looks at me and he goes, and he's just like kind of scowling. And then he goes, it's a matter of public record. And I go, oh, you know what, Mr. Meany, I'm sure it is. But you see, I don't have my public record with me today, and I've got to do a story. And I'm just wondering, could you just tell me how much money do you make every year as a friend of the working man? And he's just scowling at me, right? So the limousine pulls up just what I'm doing. I got me on tape, and I got him, what local are you with and all that. I got the whole story. And the limousine pulls up. And this big guy gets out and he gives me a really nasty look. He's the bodyguard, and they take the golf clubs off that the bellman has brought out. And they put him in the trunk of the limousine and they close it and everything. And the guy opens the door and Meany gets in and close the door. And then the bodyguard gets in the front, and they're just ready. They're just pulling away from the curb. And George Meany turns his head to scowl at me one last time. And he breaks his cigar on the passenger window, the back passenger window. It's going like that. And I thought, oh man. So one time there've been a lot of times, but that was one where I wish I was on television. I wish I'd had a TV camera because it was a really classic event. So the point of the story is if you keep your eyes open and you're watching what's going on and you're not all wrapped up in your technology, you see you have opportunities to do some really fun things. And as a reporter, I did a lot of really fun things. I embarrassed Vice President designate Gerald Ford before he became president with a really stupid question one time, just jacking with him. But, and I've done that. And when I was invited to the White House to have lunch with Ronald Reagan, and there were 100 of us there for a media type of lunch. It's a long story. I won't tell it now. But, when I talked to President Reagan, I go, hey, how you doing? How's it going? Miss you. We used to see a lot more of you when you're in California, kind of thing, and everything. And just talk to him like a regular guy. And and I'll tell you this is my testimonial. Ronald Reagan was a regular guy. He was a president. He was a master communicator. He was a spin doctor. He did a lot of things, but he was just an awesome person. He just was so comfortable. You know, I could put my arm around his shoulder and just have a chat with him, and it didn't bother him in the least. He wasn't pretentious. There was nothing pretentious about him. And you can't say that for a lot of our, quote, leaders in this world today. They're just really not, they're not of this world. And the last real quick thing as we run over, I'm sure, but John Ehrlichman was President Nixon's, one of his two right-hand men. It was Haldeman and Ehrlichman. And Ehrlichman went to prison for Watergate. And when he got out of prison, he wrote a book, and he came through on a book tour, and I got a chance to sit down and talk to him. And he told me something I'll never forget. He said, from this day forward, we will never really have, we can't have a Washington or a Lincoln type of president again, because we scrutinize people so thoroughly, and the really great people have imperfections. And we're going to so focus on the imperfections that it's very unlikely, in his opinion at the time, and this is going back in the 1970s, he said, it's my opinion that we will never have really an authentic American president as a leader again, because of the degree of scrutiny that we go through. You know, people knew all kinds of things about Kennedy. They knew what he was doing and, you know, what his problem was. With women and whatnot,
lady
but
problem.
It wasn't reported. You know, it wasn't. They really went to his. They loved his speeches and they loved his message for America, kind of thing. But that's not the world that we live in anymore. It's all about, like you say, grab the phone, capture it on video, and see if you can catch somebody screwing up.
And we got a lot of people that, you know, are willing to be wrong so they can be first. I think this responsibility for the things that you say in the law enforcement realm, we talk about you're responsible for every round you send downrange. And so whatever you fire out into the world, those are your words and you're responsible for their actions. We don't see journalists taking those sort of responsibilities right now. I want to show you something. One, I'll get your interview coaching review, because people don't know this maybe, but my dad is my coach, and he's my critic, I will say, and he's both self-appointed and requested. He gives me solicited and unsolicited advice all the time, and I always take it in and try to say, can I do this better? And people are not doing that in the world. Like, if you're pretty enough and they hire you, then you just go do it. And if you're terrible at the job, we see a lot of people that have a lot of fame that are not very good at the craft, at the skill. I just want you to reflect on that, but also on the content of this particular interview, because I found this and it's interesting. We're going to see a lot of these failures come out because we're living in a different time when the news media spin. It's not coming through that one microphone box, and it's not one person sending it out. There's the upside of independent media is that tons of people are getting the story. Here's a little story from a local.
Did in fact see an individual on the roof with a weapon.
He saw the shooter.
He did.
Your officers are on patrol. They hear that there is a suspicious person on the rooftop. What did your officers do?
So our officers in the area started to converge on the building. My understanding is they did a full perimeter walk of the building. Weren't able to see up on the roof. Two of the officers went to what appeared to be the lowest point from ground to roof. One of the officers actually boosted the second officer up high enough for him to grab hold of the roof. When he was able to pull his head up over the roof, he did in fact see an individual on the roof with a weapon.
He saw the shooter?
He did.
And what did the shooter do?
Turned towards him, had the barrel of his weapon pointed at the officer.
At that point, the officer's hanging on to the side of the roof?
Yes.
Unable to pull a gun out?
Unable to
defend himself? Unable to reach his radio?
Any of that, yeah. Strictly defensive movement for him to lower his head, duck, lost his own grip, right? Fell approximately 8 feet to the ground.
That's a steep drop.
It's a good drop, yes.
Did he get hurt?
He did.
In that moment, did they realize there's a threat right now to the former president?
They did. So both the boosting officer and the officer that fell were both on the radio, indicating that there was an individual on the roof that did in fact have a weapon.
Who did they radio?
So there was a blanket tactical channel being used.
Everyone heard it?
Everyone that was on that tactical channel heard it, yes.
How much time between that radio communication and the gun being fired at the former president?
That I don't have that information.
All right, that's the end of the clip. Dad, how do you give that interviewer the score? This is an interview of town manager of Butler Township, Tom Knight. So he's responding. He's not the police chief or anything, but he's a guy that, theoretically helps pay the salaries. How's the interviewer doing there?
Not bad. Not bad. pretty short, simple questions. Seem to flow logically out of what's the next thing you do. I'm thinking of what the response of the officer was. Why doesn't he just fire off 2 shots? Why doesn't he just fire off 2 shots into the ground, or call some attention to it? We called on, see, it's this technology. Well, we put it out over the radio, and there's a lot of noise on the radio. You've talked about it. You got 5 different channels all going into one, and people are going, oh, well, this, and they're going back and forth, and they're talking everything. That doesn't solve the problem. He didn't, there was a lapse of judgment on that officer's part. I don't care if he was hurt or not. He could pull out his pistol, fire a shot into the ground. Now everybody's attention. And if there was enough time, we don't know if there was, but not a bad interview. So we talk about pitchers and catchers. I've tried to watch some of the stuff that's going on. We've got the convention going on this week, and the interviewers just want to give these soliloquies. They just want to go on and on and on and show everybody how smart they are. And it's just pathetic. It's just not, that person, I don't know who it was or where she came from, but she's asking pretty short, simple questions. What happened next? What happened next? Then what did he do? Then what did he do? Did he do this? Did he do that? That's how you do it. But these people are going, well, I know that when you were in service yourself, and when you served in Congress for 32 years, and blah, 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 and the question goes on forever and ever. Watch the interviewer. And when you see someone, and I hate to pick on him because I don't know him personally, I'm sure he's probably a nice guy, but Sean Hannity is the classic example. Sean just goes on and on and on and on and on and on. And as the guest, what you're supposed to do is nod your head and go, "That's right, Sean. That's the interview." That's not an interview. Yeah, Larry King taught me this. I knew Larry King. That's another long story. I knew him when I was in Miami. We worked radio together. He did an overnight shift, and I worked at a music station. But I met him, and it's a small media community. And then I brought him to San Francisco when I was at KCBS, and put him on the radio in San Francisco for the first time. And that was a big deal to him because he loved San Francisco. And he came out and did a week's worth of shows from the Clift Hotel. But Larry King had a very simple thing. He said, a lot of people go into an interview and they have like 10 questions. He said, I never have 10 questions. I might have 2. And the secret to a good interview is the second question comes out of the first answer. That's not brain surgery, folks. That's pretty simple. The second question comes out of the first answer. In other words, you ask a question and then you listen. And based on what your guest says or the interview subject, you form the second question. And I think that's what she did there. I haven't really analyzed it. It's the first time I heard it, but if you go back and listen, it's like she's just going logically along with him telling the story, and she's a catalyst. She's not a co-conspirator in the telling of the story. And that's what's lost. We've lost that as a technique. It's terrible.
When you're a investigator, the basics of it, if you want to go all the way back, we just need to know a couple of things, right? Who, what, when, where, why, and how. Those are them. Those are the questions. This is the way that you tell a story. So when you're facilitating telling the story, we want to know those things. And anybody that gets lost in the speculation, if you don't have a real answer to those things, and this is what I've kind of urged people to be a skeptic about. If somebody has some of the answers, well, this is who, and this is where, and this is how. And you can't answer the why. And the why is completely illogical. Like a guy who served in the military, was part of the Ranger Battalion, came out of a sniper detail, went in and became a sniper for Donald Trump. And now you think, because there's been this internet chatter, oh, the Secret Service actually pulled the trigger and there was a patsy. And you just go, well, why? Why would someone do that? You have to explain to me how someone who would just break with every single thing they've done. And if it doesn't make any bit of sense, I mean, I guess if you ruled it down to that was the only thing left, where everything else, all the impossible is ruled out, and that's the only thing, however improbable, so be it. So we go to the Sherlock Holmes piece. But man, most of the times you're not going to get those real answers, and they're not even close. Like you're just spitballing, and it sounds good to you, so you're going to run with it, and you're going to be the same as the social media lady who wanted to catch a video of Donald Trump getting shot for God knows what reason. It could be totally honest and stupid, and they still do it. I have this little clip just because we'll laugh about it. This was something I played you before we got started. This is not our palate cleanse, folks, but we're going to throw this. If the title up here that you're not seeing is when you're a grandfather, and so when my kids are old enough to have kids, and they ask us what it was like living through 2020 through 2024. This is the kind of sense of humor both my dad and I have, I think. So here you go. This is a little clip about explaining how you talk to kids maybe 50 years from now.
Watched a lot of retarded people. Spent time with them, observed them. Watched all the retarded stuff they did.
That's kind of what we got going on right now. We can't help it.
That's exactly it.
So here's one of my favorite retarded people. We got a retarded person. He's a functional retard. This is Van Jones. This is the guy. My most vivid memory of this guy on CNN was crying when Donald Trump was elected, which I don't know that people did that before, but maybe people cried when people got elected historically. Do you remember people crying when people got elected or not elected?
Not around me.
Okay. All right. So grown man, what am I going to tell my children? Donald Trump just got elected. The world is end. Now his tune is more fearful. I think this is actually because we're going to pivot to the end of what's going on in the world, just so people, if they didn't pay attention, there's a twist. The twist happened last night. So here's the little lead up to it.
A bullet couldn't stop Trump. A virus just stopped Biden. You got the nominees of this party getting their butts kissed. Biden's getting his butt kicked by his own party. The Democrats are coming apart. The Republicans are coming together.
All right. And so here's the story. This is the CNN where you go. I actually found it yesterday. They've moved on to something else now. Nancy Pelosi is the problem. But Joe Biden tested positive for COVID. He's going to take some time off. He's going to break away. I'm curious. What do you got for that one, Dad?
I don't know. I have theories, but I don't report theories, so I can't really say. I just think it's kind of funny. How many boosters has he had? Let's just go there.
If he's following the regimen, he has 9.
Well, there you go. You see, isn't that special? Come on, folks, wake up. That's what I'm saying. It's like put the phone down a little bit and just walk through the forest and pay attention to the tree limbs, because this is, and where's the apology? Where's the correction? Where's somebody saying like, boy, we sure missed the boat on that vaccine stuff. that didn't work out very well. But you don't have anyone doing it, and just have cover your tracks. And there are millions of folks who have bought it. Now, thank goodness they've knocked off. They're not taking 7, 8, and 9 of the boosters. They're finally dropping off. And as stories like this come out, I don't even know if anybody asked that question. Do they ask that question? They say,
I do.
You do, and I do, but I don't know. I don't see, and maybe some conservative media do, but they're going like, okay, when are we going to get to the point where we're going to recognize the truth, which is pretty straightforward, that COVID, don't know what the motivation was, don't know exactly how it happened and all that stuff, everything, but that COVID doesn't add up. It just doesn't add up. It doesn't make any sense. It's a virus, and boy, some people made billions of dollars. You have government contract to produce millions of doses of whatever they put in their systems, made a lot of people sick, killed a lot of people, but it didn't keep anybody from getting COVID that we can tell. Some people got it and didn't get COVID. Some people didn't get it and didn't get COVID. Some people got it and got COVID. Some people didn't get it and got COVID. It's like, okay.
Yeah, we're all in the same group. So here's the investigator question of this. This is the way that this works. I like to do it Socratically. As you know, I've kind of gotten to this point, and it takes a lot of discipline to do it. But everybody's instinct is to go, you screwed up. Look what you did. You went out and got a shot or something like that. And it's like, no. Let me just do it this way. If you got the shot, what made you choose to do that? And there's an answer there. I was scared. It seemed like the best answer. I, read all the people that I trust. I took the advice of somebody on the news. Okay. Maybe the president. And then the follow-up is the CDC was the one recommending the shot. They recommend a booster. They've recommended 9. Of those 9, how many have you gotten? And the answer is somewhere between 0 and 9. And so then the follow-up question to that is, there's something must have changed between the time that you heard something and got the original shots and the time that you decided not to follow the regimen 0 through 9. What was that thing? Why are you no longer on that program? And then the last thing is there any moment of self-reflection where you think maybe some people thought that thing earlier And can you get in line with those folks? Do you feel like maybe you owe them an apology? Do you have to treat people differently? Did something happen? Do you have to have some self-reflection and say, I got there late? Can you just be honest? And then let people just either deal with it or take that cognitive dissonance and walk off and not be your friend or whatever it may be. You don't have to be mean about it, I think. And that actually is doing more journalistic. That is actually doing more investigative. That's being a skeptic, but you're not being mean or rude. You don't have to be unkind about it. Just let them, and maybe they'll come back to you at some point.
I think they missed the last stage, that reflective stage. I think that's where we have a hard time with it, because if you get into the reflective mode, then you have to be willing to accept whatever comes out of that. And if you take a look at yourself and you go, it wasn't somebody else's fault. Somebody else didn't make that decision. They didn't make me do it. It's my fault. I screwed up. That's really hard. It's really hard for people to get to the point where they can admit their mistakes. And certainly not public people, not politicians, certainly not media people, not the talking heads on television, not the big stars of the internet. You put out something and then you confront them with the truth. And I'll just, not to pick the scab off an old wound, but it's like if you say, we have certain things that are part of the boilerplate in a search warrant that's for the FBI. If the FBI does a search, no, this is part of it. And then you go like, no, this is, they don't want to, it's like, just, okay. I get it. Okay. You've just presented the facts to me. That's true. You can't really dispute it, but no, I'm going to argue about it. Now I'm going to call you names, because that's how we do. That's what we deal with it. I'm dealing with in the small town I live in right now. I'm asking questions about some budget things that are going on. And I have a woman who calls back and says, have you given blood at the local blood bank? It's like, what does that have to do with it? This has nothing to do with it. The best one yesterday, she said, what church do you go to? And my response was, I go to the church that prays for lost souls like you.
That's a classic Charlie answer.
I'm sorry. I mean, and I said, if you're sincere, if you really sincerely want to know, my wife and I will take you along with this, with you. You can come with us when we go to church. But don't try to shame me. Don't try to, answer my simple. It's not a trick question. Simple questions are asked. Just give an honest answer. And it's like, did you know that deadly force is standard boilerplate language in an FBI search warrant? And the answer is either yes or no. And the answer is obviously no. But if I say no, then I'm not going to look like the hero that just made this great discovery. And that passes for journalism today. It's like, okay, now I'm going to get as many people as I can on my side to stand up for my false opinion. And then if I win, if I have more people than you do, then it must be the truth, right?
The tyranny of democracy. It's brilliant. The other thing people are not really paying attention to is, and those of us that have been looking at it go, people's facilities slip as they get older. Not everybody, but probably and maybe you could speak this more than I can, but I see people as they age, there are some things they just don't do as well. And it doesn't mean that they don't have wisdom, and it doesn't mean that they're not valuable or important people. But losing a step is kind of what happens. You can't lift what you did. You can't run as fast as you did. You can't draw a pistol and shoot as fast as you did unless you're Jerry Miculek. And some things just kind of are naturally supposed to go that route. And so you become less of the person at the front of the battle and maybe the guy at the back that's doing tactician. Joe Biden's obviously done that. People have somehow decided to ignore it for quite a while. It's very weird to watch. What do you see as somebody who's in your 70s watching a guy in his 80s who looks like he's been losing a step for quite a while now?
I know from my own experience. It's like I said, when I went back and you said, okay, we're going to talk about this thing, and it's kind of, reporting and attempted assassination. Those are the something. So I started going through, like, how many attempted assassinations were there? Well, I think I remember, but oh man, I forgot about all the Ford stuff. The first one was a woman didn't have a bullet in the chamber. She had, the gun was loaded, but not in a fire position. And she ended up, that was Squeaky Fromm. She ended up going to jail. And then the next woman, and I forgot all about that this was a part of this narrative of attempted assassinations, even though I know it. So my memory is not nearly what it was when I was younger. I never had Kyle's memory, ladies and gentlemen. I'll tell you that right now. As a little kid, I go like, how does he remember that stuff? All these movies that he's talking about that he saw when he was a kid. I've seen a lot of movies. Your mom and I would put on a movie and we go, have we seen this before? Yeah, but I don't remember it. And so let's go ahead and watch it. And then we discover it as we go along. And then maybe we kind of know what's going to happen at the end when we get about, an hour and a half into the movie. But so the memory is something that just isn't there. It's just not as good. I went out in the front yard the other day. I have a big boulder. Somebody knocked it over with their car. And I went, okay, well, I'm going to put this boulder back where I had it. And I picked it up with both hands. Now my shoulder's killing me, and it's been killing me for a week and a half because I lifted something that's probably 300 pounds, which when I was younger and I knew how to use my legs, I use my legs and everything, but my joints and my muscles and my body doesn't respond the way it used to. I watched Joe Biden walking up the stairs of Air Force One, and I feel for him. I go like, hey, I don't handle stairs as well as I did even last year or the year before that. So I know I don't think I'm as delusional as he is. That's an
unkind impression.
That's different, but we all do. And my heart goes out to him. It's like, what a cruel thing in one sense. And in another sense, I said, this guy's been a liar his whole life. He's never been honest. You go back and see all the mainstream media when he was a senator and how they were ripping him all the time for plagiarism and lying. And, and we didn't do fact check as a relatively modern term. We didn't say those words. It was just like you either got it right or you got it wrong. If you got it wrong, you apologized and you had to own it. It doesn't happen anymore. That's what we started out today. But I just feel, I feel one part of me feels bad for him. And the other part of me says, this is a really important question, folks. Who is running the government of the United States of America? Who's running it? Who's in charge? Who's making these decisions? Who decided that boys could be girls and decided that we're going to push that out as a national agenda? And whoever did it, they are not only deranged, like David Koresh, but they are evil. That's evil, immoral stuff. That's weird. And the, dealing with kids and all the things we're seeing in our world. So is it crazier now than it was? Well, it's been crazy for a long time. Most of my life, there've been a lot of tards. We've seen them. They're there. They've been out and kind of pushing against us. But we're reaching new levels because there's such a high level of unawareness of things that are right in front of you, and people don't see them because if it's not on their phone, they don't see it.
Well, let's put this on their phone because this is fun. Sometimes the guy who claims to be running the country but doesn't appear to be has some of those senior moments where he just lets you know that he hired the black guy. You remember the black guy that he hired?
And so it's all about treating people with dignity. And it's about making sure that, look, for example, look at the heat I'm getting because I named the Secretary of Defense to a black man. I named Ketanji Brown. Because of the people I've named.
He named the black man. He doesn't know the name of the black man, though. It's so weird. All right, let's come to a close. You've written books. You want to tell people about the little books? Just give them kind of a quick primer, and then I think you've probably got another one in the works that you can tease out, and people will be interested in hearing about it.
My first book is called One Stupid Mistake, Smart Decision Making in a Crazy World. It's a series of short stories about people making decisions. And my focus was to try to, just what we've talked about today, to try to make people reflective and really kind of think. If you make smart decisions in little things, then when you get to the crisis moment, you'll make the smart decision in the big things, in the crisis moment. Your odds are much better of leading a happy, successful life if you consciously practice making smart decisions. So One Stupid Mistake, title of that book. Second one is When Did You Stop Being You? And I think it's probably it's a precursor to a lot of conversation that we've had here today. And it says that there are people who are in the branding business. right? They're personal brand experts. There are thousands of them in America, thousands of personal brand experts. What does that mean? They all say the same thing: project a consistent image across all platforms. So they assume that you're going to be on social media, and it's not about being authentic, honest, intelligent, or anything else. It's just be consistent. If you consistently project an image, then that's wonderful. And I call BS on that and say, it's not about projecting an image, folks. It's about being real. Be who you are, be honest, and be authentic. And that's how to live your life. So that was that one. And then the last one, which has had very little success commercially, and I knew it before I did it. And it's not, none of these books are ever going to make a lot of money. It's not, that wasn't ever the goal. I got stuff I got to get out. So I put it out there. The last one is called The Story of Your Life, and the subtitle is Write Your Own Obituary. And it's reflective. It's an examination of conscience, questions you should ask yourself, I think, in order to be healthy. I don't care if you write your obituary or not. That's really not the point. I put it in the context of telling the story of how to write your obituary. But it's really about looking back over your life and saying, okay, these are the decisions I made. These were good decisions. These were bad decisions. These are the people in my life. These are the people who had a positive impact. These are the people who have the negative impact. These are the experiences I've had in my life. And the one thing that we have to remember is that you are the only person on the planet, in the history of the planet, of all the millions of people, billions of people who came before you, and all those who will come after you. You're the only one who has your experiences, who sees through your lens. And there's value in that. And if you don't spend some time thinking about the things that you've seen and you've done, and the stories that I've told you here today about my life, if you don't do that with your own life, then you're missing something really important, because you can't have context for the meaning of life unless you take a look at it. And probably sometimes it's good to just sit down and do a review, which I did before today, to say like, oh man, what other things happened? There are a lot of weird things that have happened, but going through those things, I think makes you happier and healthier and gives you a better perspective, and hopefully will keep you from running on as long as we've run on today. Your mom slipped me a note and said, you've gone way over, Kyle. What have you done? No, and it's my fault.
She's not in charge here. Men are running the show. We can maybe send a copy of the Write Your Own Obituary book to Kamala Harris, who has great significance to the passage of time in her life. We're going to play a couple little funny things on here. Let me just throw it on the screen one more time, though, while you're on there. Folks, if you want to follow my dad, Charlie Seraphin, if you want to know why I am the way I am, that's his Twitter handle, which he doesn't use all that much, but it's at Seraphin Charlie. If you're listening, that's what you're missing from the subtitles here, at Seraphin Charlie, author, newsman, retired, per Glenn Beck, who was no one when you got started. He wasn't even in the business, and now he kind of goes into the Broadcaster Hall of Fame. You did coach some Broadcasting Hall of Fame folks, yes?
I did. Yep. Quite a few in the sports arena, some play-by-play guys and some news anchors, and Lester Holt, who just did the famous thing. He worked for me as a bureau chief in Sacramento, was our reporter in Sacramento, covered state government before he went to Chicago and got into television. And he went from Chicago to New York, and as a local anchor and reporter in New York, and then became the face of NBC Evening News.
That's wild. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah, a lot of wild stuff out there. All right. Let's shut it down there. I will give folks a funny little video, a little cleanse of the palate, which it wasn't too heavy today, I think, but we do have something funny about just the way that time works now and the way that people interact. So here is very different than my dating experience, very different than your dating experience, which are all now a long ways in the past. This is some poor kid's dating experience, and it's put to AI. So if you guys have never seen these, and if you've never seen these kind of videos, it's like I think it's Minecraft in the background. It's some sort of video game. There's some epic music, and they have the text read by this AI-generated singing voice, which is very silly. This poor guy can't remember the name of the girl that he met last night, who actually wrote him back and could have been something, but his friends are not going to help him out. So we'll play this little bit here. Dad, thanks for joining me. I enjoyed chatting with you. This is what it's like sitting at the Seraphin family dinner table, folks, just so you know. It's just a lot of long stories. All right, here we go. Let's watch some weird stuff.
Do you know who this is? Well, obviously, I can stop thinking about you. Really met last night. What do you remember about me? You're from the city, you want to be a singer. You have two sisters, what else do you remember? Your incredible personality, your breathtaking smile, that amazing dress, this dress, yes, that dress. You have a good memory, you're worth remembering. guess the truth will out, but then she will hate me and I will lose her forever. Why would she hate you? Because she's testing me and I'm about to fail. Then do what I do on test sheet. Guess, there's like a million names in the world. I see you typing low. I would guess a girl's name. Oh, it's probably not Hector and it's probably not Dennis. My name isn't that long. I'm not guessing. Maybe it's Roxanne, that's your mom's name. My mom is a girl, her name isn't Roxanne. I think it starts with an S. You know the first letter, that's enough to guess. Maybe it's like Wordle, where you get 5 tries. Try guessing Snake, what girl is named Snake? Snake is a cool name, and this girl is cool. Text her, what's up, Snake? This isn't helping, you just forgot her name. It's no big deal, I forget names all the time. Not for people you care about, true. I always remember my mom's name, hello. Okay, so will you help me? I really don't want to lose her. Maybe we can look her up. What do you remember about her? I remember everything, then what's her name? I remember how gorgeous she is. I remember her wit, her charm. She loves to sing. She has a dog named Spencer. He's 3 years old. Her favorite food is breakfast burritos. She played basketball in high school. She does yoga 4 times a week. I remember everything. Oh my God, you love hot burger. Please don't make fun of me right now. I'm not making fun of you. I'm happy for you. I've never seen you in love. It's awesome, dude. It's not awesome if I lose her. It's over. It's nothing. It doesn't have to be. You don't get it, bro. Girls get mad when you forget their names. It's just how these things work. Yeah, but they really like it when you remember all those other things. Love is in the little details. Let's just agree to disagree. No, text her right now. Or else what? I don't know, but it's gonna be bad. Calm down, no, I won't calm down. You're my best friend and you're in love. I'm not going to stand by and let you ruin it. Damn, dude, okay, you have everything to gain and nothing to lose. Okay, I lied, I remember everything except your name. I remember your favorite song, your worst boss, your best birthday party, your dog's name, your favorite drink. I even remember that your great uncle invented the toaster. I hope that's not a deal breaker. Oh my God, can I tell you a secret? Sure, I forgot yours too, but I remember everything else, mostly how nice you are and hot. So what is your name? I'll tell you on one condition, that I don't forget it. Lolo, that you leave my contact as hot girl bar deal. My name is Sophia, but my friends call me Snake. No freaking way. I know it's weird, no, I love it. I found her online. You are never going to believe this. You need to marry her.
I didn't actually watch the end of this thing. Oh, my friends call me Snake. That's the best part of that whole video. It makes it worse watching the whole thing. I got to put it in the show notes. I can't believe that. That's special. Okay, so that's God's hand out in the world. It happens, folks. And if that ever happened to you, please put it in my comments or leave us a review that says that this changed your life too. God, that's so funny. Here's a 5-star review from one of our great listeners. This is from Kay Riley. I'm just dying. Found and shared 5 stars. I listen to the Loopcast regularly. I heard your name enough times on the show that I thought you'd give your podcast a try. Familiar topics are covered from a unique angle due to your experience in the Air Force and the FBI, and your message is inspirational because of your continued bravery. Gosh, this is very flattering. Thank you so much. She says, thank you for your service. Thank you for throwing a flag at the FBI. And lastly, thank you for continuing to inform your fellow Americans and to prod our confidence in the power of our own voices. Well, that is a very flattering message. If you guys want to leave your own flattering, sarcastic, or otherwise, we will read it here on the show. Just do it on Apple. We also have options on Spotify, and I think iHeartRadio does as well. So thanks so much to my guest. Let me just leave you with this final little tasty thought, which is that we can trust ourselves. We should be aware that being honest is actually not a problem, even like our little palate cleanser there, and that it's been weird and wild for a very long time. We always feel like we are in times unlike any other. The nice thing about being able to look back at history and talking to folks that have a little bit more experience than us is that it's always been really weird. It's been weird as long as it's been around, and I'm sure they thought that for all the time. So this is not a time unlike any other. In fact, it's a time like all others, and all those times are a good time to give your faith and your trust in God, because that's who's carried everyone else through for all that time. Thanks so much for listening to the program. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to my dad, and I also enjoy listening to my dad because I talk to him as often as I can. We'll see you guys again tomorrow for a Friendly Friday. We'll try to keep it on track for the time limit, and God bless all of you. We'll see you at 0930 tomorrow here on rumble.com, on X, on YouTube, and so on. Make sure you share and like this video. Have a great one.
Thanks for listening to The Kyle Seraphin Show, streamed live weekdays on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. Follow Kyle on Twitter, Truth Social, and Instagram at Kyle Seraphin.